Ayatollah Khomeini, a religious leader previously exiled by the Iranian regime, returned to take power in Iran. What followed was a revolution that spiraled into violence and fear. The Shah, who had been overthrown and was battling cancer, sought refuge in the United States, which granted him asylum. In 1979, this decision outraged the Iranian public, sparking massive protests outside the U.S. Embassy in Tehran with one united demand: the execution of the Shah. Inside the embassy, things remained calm for a while. Diplomats joked about the protesters outside and relied on what they believed were bulletproof windows. Civilians queued for visas as helicopters hovered overhead. However, some protesters scaled the fence and infiltrated the embassy grounds, initiating an emergency response. The crowd eventually broke through the main entrance, prompting panic among the staff. As security rapidly deteriorated, efforts began to destroy all sensitive documents. Contrary to their assumptions, the windows were not bulletproof. The security team prepared for confrontation, but as one member stepped out to negotiate, he was immediately overpowered. The protesters used him as leverage, blindfolded him, and entered the building, threatening his life. While documents were frantically destroyed, many diplomats were taken hostage. However, 6 staff members managed to escape through a side exit onto the street. The U.S. government soon learned of the escape and confirmed the 6 had found temporary shelter at the home of Canadian Ambassador Ken Taylor. Meanwhile, the Secretary of State criticized the CIA for failing to foresee the revolution. Extraditing the Shah, who was severely ill and undergoing chemotherapy, was ruled out. Attention shifted to rescuing the 6 escapees, temporarily setting aside concerns about those already captured. 10 weeks passed. News of Iran's brutality spread globally, and Americans expressed solidarity with the hostages. Tony, a CIA agent, received a call and immediately rushed to HQ, where his boss, Jack, briefed him on the situation. The Canadian Foreign Secretary was urging Taylor to leave Iran for his own safety. Jack expressed concern about a mug book left behind, which contained the identities of embassy workers. Iranians were working to piece together shredded files and could soon discover the identities of the 6 missing Americans. The CIA was asked to assist with a rescue plan. A meeting was held to discuss options. One plan proposed giving the escapees bicycles, as driving was not viable due to roadblocks. Tony mocked the idea, joking they'd need training wheels and a support team with a tire pump. Though his sarcasm was met with skepticism, Jack vouched for Tony's expertise. Tony emphasized the urgency. There wasn't enough time to wait. He compared extractions to abortions. They needed direct and decisive action. Several ideas were floated, but none seemed practical. As both governments continued to argue and the Iranians progressed in reconstructing shredded files, Tony had an epiphany while speaking to his son. He pitched a bold new idea: creating a fake Canadian film production team scouting exotic Middle Eastern locations, specifically Iran. Though officials were skeptical, Tony convinced them it was worth trying. Meanwhile, Iranian authorities confirmed that 6 diplomats were unaccounted for and ramped up efforts to find them. Tony met with Mr. Chambers, a quirky Hollywood producer known for his love of donuts. Tony flew to Los Angeles with CIA approval to make the movie production seem real. Tony explained the mission, and Chambers connected him with Lester, a prominent producer. Though Lester found the plan absurd, he agreed to help and suggested they start by developing a script. In Iran, a suspicious housekeeper questioned Taylor's wife about their Canadian guests. Back in LA, Jack informed Tony he only had 72 hours left before the mission would be scrapped. While browsing scripts, Tony found a science fiction story titled Argo and pitched it to Chambers and Lester. They loved the concept and secured a writer after Lester masterfully negotiated a lower rate. Jack warned Tony that Iranian airport checks were becoming stricter. Despite this, Tony pushed forward. Chambers and Lester hosted a media event to publicize Argo, putting it in industry magazines and plastering posters across Hollywood. The press coverage added credibility to the cover story. As Iran continued branding the US and CIA as terrorists, Tony returned to Washington to present his progress. Initially, state officials dismissed the idea as ridiculous. But after Tony and Jack insisted it was the best of bad options, approval was granted. Jack accompanied Tony to the airport, warning him the CIA wouldn't acknowledge him if caught. Before boarding, Tony penned a heartfelt letter to his son, apologizing for missing his birthday and reaffirming his love. In Iran, the 6 escapees were still in hiding, praying for a miracle as danger loomed closer. Tony first flew to Istanbul, where a British agent briefed him on Iran's security system. Tony then applied for a visa at the Iranian consulate, remaining calm and receiving it without issue. Upon arrival in Tehran, he visited the Ministry of Culture and Guidance. En route, he witnessed the horrors of the revolution: hangings, fear, and destruction. At the ministry, he submitted fake production papers and said a 6-person Canadian crew would soon join him. Tony reunited with Ken Taylor, who had prepared Canadian passports for the 6 escapees. The documents needed verification and stamping, a process that would take a day or two. Taylor urged Tony to finish fast. Later that night, Tony met the escapees and laid out the plan. He handed out cover stories and scripts. The group was understandably doubtful and scared. Tony reassured them calmly, emphasizing they had no better option. Taylor informed Tony that the Canadian government was closing the embassy, leaving the 6 with no safe haven. Despite their fears, they agreed to go along with Tony's plan. He gave them their new identities and drilled them on every detail. A letter arrived at Tony's hotel: approval for the film crew to visit the Grand Bazaar. Jack warned it might be a trap, but Tony said refusing would be suicide. The next day, Tony informed the group about the Grand Bazaar trip. Though nervous, they had no alternative. At the bazaar, they toured with a ministry official. Iranian intelligence secretly photographed them. Tension escalated when a shopkeeper demanded they hand over their photos. The situation grew heated until Reza suggested ending the visit. Meanwhile, soldiers questioned Taylor's housekeeper. She kept calm and claimed the guests had only arrived 2 days prior. The group returned shaken, but preparations continued. Tony quizzed them on their cover stories and what to say at airport checkpoints. Back in Washington, the White House grew concerned that they'd approved such a wild plan. Jack called Tony with grim news. The operation had been canceled, and a military rescue was being planned instead. Tony was stunned, just hours away from executing the mission. Jack told him to obey orders, but Tony decided to press on. One of the escapees interrupted Tony's brooding and asked if he was ready for another round of practice. Tony smiled and reassured them. The group's confidence returned. Then Taylor informed Tony that he'd been ordered to destroy the fake passports and suggested Tony flee alone. Devastated, Tony left with a bottle of scotch. At his hotel, Tony sat in silence, knowing the group was doomed without him. But the next morning, defying orders, Tony picked up the group. At the same time, Jack fought tooth and nail in Washington to get the flight tickets reinstated. He eventually succeeded. At the airport, the group tried to check in, but their names didn't appear. Tony remained composed and asked the agent to check again. Jack managed to confirm the tickets just in time. Meanwhile, Iranian intelligence restored a photo of one of the escapees. At security, they passed the first checkpoint. The second checkpoint flagged their exit papers. Iranian officials began questioning them. The group presented a letter from the Ministry of Culture, which satisfied the guards for now. At the final checkpoint, they were pulled aside again. A fluent group member explained their cover story in Persian and passionately pitched the film, earning the guards' trust. The guard decided to verify their story by calling the production office. Fortunately, Chambers, still at the office, picked up and played along, confirming the crew's presence in Iran. At the same time, Iranian forces stormed Taylor's house, finding it empty. They alerted the airport. Tony's group was already boarding. They were the last ones on the plane. The Iranians couldn't catch them in time. Once out of Iranian airspace, the group erupted in joy, hugging and crying. Tony, relieved, shed silent tears. The CIA celebrated too. In the end, the US gave full credit to Canada to protect the remaining hostages and diplomatic relations. Though Canada faced backlash from Iran, the successful mission stole the spotlight. Tony was later awarded the Intelligence Star, one of the CIA's highest honors. The Iran hostage crisis finally ended in 1981 after 444 days, when all remaining hostages were freed. The end.